The rain poured in relentless sheets, drenching the highway in a slick, deadly glaze. Lights flashed in every direction, blue, red, white, reflecting off broken glass and twisted metal. Screams of pain and panic echoed through the night as paramedic Evan Cole worked with mechanical precision, suppressing the wave of anxiety clawing at his chest. He couldn't afford to feel anything right now. Not yet. Over here! A police officer yelled, waving him toward an overturned SUV near the edge of the pileup. Evan grabbed his med bag and sprinted through the chaos. The vehicle was crushed against the guardrail, its roof caved in from the impact. Inside, he saw a woman trapped in the driver's seat, her face pale and bloodied. In the back seat, a young girl, maybe 5 or 6, was crying uncontrollably, clutching a teddy bear that was torn at the seams. "It's going to be okay," Evan said firmly as he crouched beside the shattered window. His voice was calm, steady, deliberate. He had learned long ago that fear spread like wildfire in emergencies. He needed to be the extinguisher. "Help my daughter!" the woman gasped, barely able to speak through her labored breaths. Her eyes were glassy with shock, but her desperation was clear. "We'll get you both out," Evan assured her. He signaled to his partner, Matteo, who was already setting up extraction equipment. "Stay with me." "What's your name?" "Rachel," she whispered. "All right, Rachel. I'm Evan. You're doing great. I need you to keep talking to me, okay? We're going to get you out, but you have to stay calm." Rachel nodded weakly, her gaze shifting toward her daughter. Evan followed her eyes and spoke gently to the girl. "Hey there, I'm Evan. What's your name?" "Oh, Lily," the girl stammered between sobs. "Hi, Lily. You're really brave, you know that? I bet that teddy bear's a brave one too. What's his name?" "Mr. Snuggles," Lily said, her voice trembling. "Mr. Snuggles? That's a great name. You hold on tight to him, okay? We're going to get you and your mom out of here." With Matteo's help, Evan carefully assessed the situation. The door frame was crushed, pinning Rachel's legs beneath the steering column. The child, though frightened, seemed physically unharmed. Extraction was going to be tricky, but they had no other choice. Minutes felt like hours as they worked to free Rachel. Firefighters pried open the crumpled door, allowing Evan to maneuver her legs free with agonizing slowness. The woman cried out in pain, and Lily's sobs grew louder. "Almost there," Evan said softly. He hated this part, the helplessness of knowing he had to inflict more pain before he could offer relief. But eventually they managed to lift Rachel from the wreckage and transfer her to a stretcher. Lily clung to Evan as he carried her out of the vehicle, her tiny arms wrapped around his neck. "It's over now," he whispered. "You're safe." The relief in their eyes was a brief but powerful reminder of why he did this job. Saving lives mattered, even when it felt like the rest of the world was falling apart. By the time Evan and Matteo finished at the scene, it was well past midnight. The rain had finally let up, leaving the highway eerily quiet under a blanket of fog. The adrenaline that had kept Evan going began to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. As he drove home through the darkened streets, his thoughts wandered to his own family, his wife, Lauren, and their 8-year-old son, Max. They were supposed to be his refuge, the place where he could let down his guard after nights like this. But lately, that refuge had started to feel more like a distant memory. Lauren had been distant for weeks, maybe months. Evan had chalked it up to stress. Her job as a financial consultant was demanding, but the signs were becoming harder to ignore. She rarely smiled anymore. Their conversations had grown shallow, revolving around logistics and household responsibilities. And then there was the money. Evan had noticed it last week while reviewing their bank statements. Several large, unexplained withdrawals, thousands of dollars gone with no clear reason. He had asked Lauren about it casually, trying not to sound accusatory. "It's just some investments I'm handling," she had said, avoiding his gaze. "Nothing to worry about." But it didn't add up. Lauren had always been meticulous with their finances, never making significant moves without discussing them first. Something wasn't right. And then there were the phone calls. She had been taking more of them in private, often stepping outside or into another room when Evan was home. He had overheard snippets, fragments of conversations that didn't make sense. "I'll see you soon," she had whispered once, her voice unusually soft. Evan tried to push the thoughts away as he pulled into the driveway, but the knot in his stomach tightened. He wasn't just imagining things. Lauren was hiding something from him. He stepped inside the house, the familiar creak of the floorboards greeting him. The living room was dark, save for the soft glow of the television. Max was asleep on the couch, a blanket draped over him. Evan smiled faintly and adjusted the blanket before heading upstairs. Lauren was already in bed, her back turned to him. She didn't stir when he entered the room. For a moment, he stood there in the doorway, wondering if he should wake her, demand answers. But exhaustion won out. He changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants, sliding into bed beside her. The silence between them was deafening. Evan stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He had just saved a mother and daughter from death, but now he faced a different kind of emergency, one that wasn't as easy to diagnose or fix. His family was slipping away from him, and he didn't know how to stop it. Sleep refused to come. The storm inside him raged on. Morning came far too quickly. Evan woke to the sound of clattering dishes in the kitchen and the soft hum of cartoons playing in the background. For a moment, he considered staying in bed, letting the world handle itself for a few more hours. But the nagging weight on his chest, the one that hadn't left since last night, pushed him to get up. When he entered the kitchen, Max was sitting at the counter, munching on a bowl of cereal. His eyes were glued to the small tablet propped up next to him, colorful animated characters bouncing across the screen. Evan ruffled his son's hair as he walked past. "Morning, bud," he said, forcing some warmth into his voice. "Morning, Dad." Max mumbled around a mouthful of cereal, barely looking up. Lauren stood by the sink, washing a few plates. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she wore a tired expression that matched his own. She didn't turn around as Evan approached, but she acknowledged him with a faint, "Morning." "Morning," he replied. He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. The tension between them was palpable, like a wall that neither of them knew how to break through. "How was work last night?" Lauren asked after a moment, her tone casual but distant. "Rough," Evan said. "There was a pile-up on the highway. A woman and her daughter were trapped in their car. We got them out, but it was touch and go for a while." Lauren finally looked at him, her eyes softening slightly. "That sounds terrifying. Are they okay?" "They will be," Evan said. He hesitated, then added, "It made me think about us. About family." Lauren stiffened almost imperceptibly, her gaze dropping to the sink. "What do you mean?" I feel like we've been drifting apart," Evan said, choosing his words carefully. "You've been distant lately. And I know I've been busy, but something feels off." Lauren wiped her hands on a dish towel, avoiding his eyes. "It's just work stress, Evan. You know how demanding my job can be. I'm sorry if I haven't been as present as I should be." Evan wanted to believe her. He wanted to take her words at face value and let the conversation end there. But the images of those bank withdrawals and private phone calls wouldn't leave his mind. "What about the money?" he asked quietly. "The withdrawals I saw on our account? You said they were for investments, but that's not like you. You've always kept me in the loop about things like that." Lauren's jaw tightened. "I told you, it's nothing to worry about. I'm handling it." "Handling it how?" Evan pressed. "Lauren, I'm your husband. I have a right to know what's going on." She set the towel down with a sharp exhale. "Evan, I don't need you interrogating me right now. I'm trying to keep things together for us. Can't you just trust me?" "Trust." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Evan stared at her for a long moment, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. He didn't want to fight, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that she was hiding something. He had seen too many families torn apart by secrets and lies during his years as a paramedic. People thought they could bury the truth, but it always found a way to resurface, usually in the worst possible way. "I'm trying to trust you," he said softly. "But you're making it really hard." Lauren shook her head, turning away from him. "I have to get ready for work. We can talk later." Evan watched her leave the kitchen, the sense of distance between them growing with every step. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to jump or cling to the crumbling ground beneath him. How had they gotten to this point? And how much further could they fall? Later that afternoon, Evan decided to take matters into his own hands. He drove to the bank and requested a detailed printout of their recent transactions. The teller gave him a polite smile, unaware of the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. As he scanned the document in his car, his heart sank. The withdrawals were even larger than he had realized, totaling tens of thousands of dollars over the past 3 months. There were also several unexplained charges at restaurants and hotels he didn't recognize, places Lauren had never mentioned. Evan's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. The evidence was damning. His mind raced with possibilities, each one more painful than the last. Was she meeting someone? Was this about more than just work? His phone buzzed on the dashboard. It was a message from Mateo. "Hey, you alright? You've been quiet today. I know last night was rough." Evan stared at the message, unable to formulate a response. He wasn't alright, not even close. Last night's crash had shaken him, but this? This was something else entirely. This was the kind of wreck he didn't know how to pull anyone out of. Finally, he typed a quick reply. "Yeah, just tired. Thanks for checking in." He put the phone down and rested his head against the steering wheel. He felt like he was drowning, trapped beneath the weight of his suspicions and fears. He had spent his entire career saving others, but now, he wasn't sure if he could save his own family. When he returned home, Lauren was gone. Max was playing video games in the living room, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing between his parents. Evan stood in the doorway for a moment, watching his son with a mixture of love and sadness. "I have to protect him from this," he thought. "Whatever's going on, I need to get to the bottom of it, for him." The road ahead was uncertain, but Evan knew one thing. The cracks in his marriage were widening, and if he didn't act soon, everything might collapse. Evan's world felt like it was coming apart at the seams, and the pressure was building by the hour. Lauren's unexplained absences and the mysterious financial transactions gnawed at his mind. He couldn't escape the nagging questions. Who was she meeting? Why was she withdrawing so much money? Every time he tried to reason through it, the worst possibilities crept back in. That night he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his phone. He knew what he had to do, though the thought of it made his stomach turn. He'd seen others go down this road, obsessing over evidence, turning their homes into battlegrounds of mistrust. He hated that he was becoming one of them, but he needed answers. He tapped on the Contacts app and found a name he hadn't called in over a year: Derek Shaw, an old friend and private investigator. The two had drifted apart after Evan got married, but Derek had always been resourceful and discreet. The phone rang twice before Derek answered. "Evan? Well, I'll be damned. Been a while." "Yeah, it has," Evan replied, his voice strained. "Listen. I need a favor. Something sensitive." "Sensitive, huh? Sounds serious. What's going on?" Evan hesitated. How did he explain this without sounding like a paranoid husband? Finally, he decided to be blunt. "I think Lauren's hiding something. There's money missing from our account, large sums, and she's been distant. I need to know if she's seeing someone." There was a pause on the other end. "Shit, man. I'm sorry. You want me to tail her, see where she's going?" "Yeah. I hate asking you for this, but I'm out of options." "No need to explain," Derek said. "I've seen this kind of thing too many times. When's her next big outing?" "She didn't mention anything, but I'll let you know as soon as I find out. I just need to know the truth, Derek. Whatever it is. You'll get it," Derek promised. "Hang in there, Evan." We'll figure this out. Evan ended the call and exhaled slowly. He felt like he had crossed an invisible line, one that couldn't be uncrossed. But if there was any chance of salvaging his marriage, he needed to confront the truth head-on. The next morning, Lauren was unusually cheerful. She cooked breakfast for the first time in weeks, chatting with Max about his upcoming soccer game. Evan watched her from across the table, his mind racing with questions. Was this a sign that things were improving, or was she trying to cover her tracks? I was thinking we could all go to the park this weekend, Lauren suggested, glancing at Evan. It's been a while since we spent a day together as a family. That sounds nice, Evan replied, though his tone was cautious. Max beamed. Can we bring the soccer ball? Of course, Lauren said with a smile. We'll make a whole day of it. For a moment, Evan allowed himself to hope that maybe things were turning around. Maybe he was wrong about her. Maybe the stress had just gotten to both of them, and they were finally finding their way back to each other. But the hope was fleeting. As soon as Lauren left the room to take a phone call, the doubt returned like a shadow creeping into the corners of his mind. Later that day, Evan received a text from Derek. Got time to talk? He stepped outside and dialed the number. Derek answered almost immediately. I've been looking into a few things, Derek said. Nothing definitive yet, but I noticed something odd. There's a hotel downtown, the Sterling Suites, that shows up on her credit card statement a couple of times. You ever stay there? No, Evan replied, his heart sinking. Never. Thought so, Derek muttered. Could be innocent, maybe business meetings or events. But you might want to check it out. Evan clenched his jaw. He could picture it now, Lauren meeting someone at the hotel behind his back. The image made his blood boil, but he pushed the anger aside. He needed evidence, not assumptions. Thanks for the heads up, Evan said. Keep me posted. Will do, Derek said. And Evan? Don't jump to conclusions. It might not be what you think. Yeah, Evan muttered. I'll try. That evening, Evan decided to confront Lauren about her weekend plans. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, when he approached. Hey, he said casually, sitting beside her. So, about this weekend. Do you have anything planned before we go to the park? Lauren hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking her head. No, not really. Why? Just curious, Evan said, studying her reaction. It's been a while since we spent quality time together. I want to make sure nothing comes up last minute. Nothing's going to come up, Lauren assured him, though her smile seemed forced. I'm looking forward to it. Evan nodded, but his suspicion deepened. She was hiding something, he was sure of it. Whether it was an affair or something else entirely, he needed to find out. That night, while Lauren slept, Evan lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The walls seemed to close in around him, the weight of his doubts suffocating. He hated this version of himself, the man who questioned every word, who snooped through bank records and made secret calls to investigators. But what choice did he have? Trust had been eroded, and he was drowning in uncertainty. This ends soon, he told himself. One way or another. He didn't know if he was ready for the truth, but it was coming for him nonetheless. Evan spent the next few days trying to focus on work, but his mind was elsewhere. The aftermath of the pileup still haunted him, Rachel's bloodied face, Lily's terrified cries, but it was nothing compared to the emotional wreckage waiting for him at home. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lauren slipping away from him, one unexplained absence at a time. Derek called with another update on Thursday morning. I followed her yesterday, Derek said. She went to a cafe on the east side of town. Spent about an hour there with a man, late 30s, maybe early 40s, business type. They looked comfortable together. Evan's stomach twisted. Comfortable how? Nothing overt, Derek replied. No touching or anything like that. But they were deep in conversation. He seemed familiar with her, leaning in close, laughing at her jokes. You get the picture. Evan gritted his teeth. He could picture it all too clearly. Did you get any photos? Yeah, sent them to your email, Derek said. Look, I can't tell you what's going on just from one meeting. Could be work-related, but I figured you'd want to see it for yourself. I do. Thanks, Derek, Evan said before ending the call. A few minutes later, he opened the email on his phone. The photos Derek had taken were grainy but clear enough. Lauren was sitting across from the man at an outdoor table, her posture relaxed, her face animated in conversation. It wasn't the cold, distant version of her that Evan had come to know in recent months. She looked happy. Who is he? Evan wondered, scrolling through the images. His mind raced with possibilities. Was this the person she had been withdrawing money for? The one she had been taking secret phone calls with? The anger bubbled up again, hot and immediate. He had been patient, too patient. It was time for answers. That evening, Evan returned home with a simmering resolve. Max was at a friend's house for a sleepover, leaving him and Lauren alone for the night. She was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner when he walked in. The scent of garlic and herbs filled the air, but it did nothing to calm his nerves. Hey, she said, glancing over her shoulder. You're home early. Yeah, Evan replied, setting his bag down on the counter. We need to talk. Lauren paused, her hand hovering over the cutting board. About what? About the cafe you went to yesterday, Evan said bluntly. And the man you were with. The color drained from Lauren's face. She set the knife down carefully, turning to face him. You followed me? No, Evan said. But I had someone else do it. Her eyes widened in shock. You hired someone to spy on me? Evan, what the hell? Don't turn this around on me, he snapped. I wouldn't have had to if you'd been honest with me. I've been watching you lie to my face for weeks. The money, the phone calls, the meetings, what's going on, Lauren? She crossed her arms defensively. It's not what you think. Then tell me. Evan demanded. Who is he? Lauren sighed, rubbing her temples. His name is Brian. He's a financial advisor. I've been meeting with him to discuss some personal matters. Personal matters? Evan repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. That's pretty vague. I didn't want to tell you because I knew you'd overreact, Lauren said, her tone growing defensive. We've been having financial issues, and I was trying to find a way to fix it without stressing you out. Financial issues? Evan asked, incredulous. Lauren, you've been pulling thousands of dollars out of our account without saying a word. You've been hiding things from me. How is that not supposed to stress me out? I didn't want to worry you, she insisted. You already deal with so much at work, life and death situations every day. I thought I could handle this on my own. Well, you didn't, Evan said coldly. You made me feel like I was going crazy, like I couldn't trust you anymore. Lauren's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry. I should have been upfront with you. But there's nothing going on between me and Brian. It's strictly business. Evan wanted to believe her. He really did. But the damage had already been done. The lies, the secrecy, it had created a chasm between them that couldn't be bridged with a simple apology. Why didn't you just tell me the truth? He asked quietly. You're my wife. We're supposed to be a team. I know, Lauren whispered. I was scared. Scared that you'd see me as a failure. That you'd think I couldn't handle our finances. Evan shook his head, frustration and sadness mingling in his chest. I don't care about the money, Lauren. I care about trust. And right now, I don't know if I can trust you. They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of their words hanging heavily in the air. Lauren's eyes shimmered with tears, but she didn't let them fall. I want to fix this, she said softly. I want us to get back to where we used to be. Evan stared at her, torn between the love he still felt and the pain of betrayal. Could they really repair the damage, or had they gone too far down this path? I don't know, he admitted. But if we're going to try, you need to be completely honest with me from now on. No more secrets. No more secrets, Lauren promised, her voice barely above a whisper. Evan nodded, though the doubt lingered. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But it was a step forward, however small. They finished dinner in relative silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The storm between them had calmed, but its echoes remained, threatening to rise again at any moment. The next few days passed in an uneasy truce. Evan and Lauren tried to go about their daily routines, but the tension between them was palpable. Conversations were brief, filled with surface-level pleasantries that barely masked the undercurrent of unresolved conflict. Evan wanted to believe that Lauren's explanation about the financial advisor was the full truth, but the seeds of doubt had been planted too deeply. He kept replaying their argument in his head, dissecting every word, every expression. Part of him felt guilty for hiring Derek to follow her, but another part, the part that had been lied to, felt justified. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. He needed more than words. Evan was in his office at home, sorting through paperwork from his latest shift, when his phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Got something you might want to see. Call me when you can. His stomach tightened. He hesitated for a moment, then dialed Derek's number. Hey, Evan, Derek said, picking up after the first ring. I wasn't sure if you still wanted updates, but I thought this was important. What is it? Evan asked, his voice steady despite the anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. I checked into that financial advisor, Brian. Derek explained. He's legit, works for a reputable firm. But here's the thing. He's been under investigation for some shady practices. Off-the-record investment deals, conflicts of interest, nothing proven yet, but it's enough to raise red flags. Evan frowned. And Lauren didn't mention any of this? Doesn't seem like it, Derek said. I also found out that she met with him again yesterday. No hotel or restaurant this time, just a private office downtown. They were in there for almost 2 hours. Evan felt a surge of frustration. She told me she'd be honest. No more secrets. Why would she keep meeting with him if there's nothing going on? That's the question, isn't it? Derek said. Look, man, I'm not trying to stir the pot. But I figured you deserved to know. Thanks, Derek, Evan muttered. I'll take it from here. He ended the call and sat in silence for a moment, his mind racing. Lauren had promised transparency, yet here she was meeting with Brian again without telling him. Maybe it wasn't an affair, but it was still deception. And after everything they had been through, deception was just as damaging. That evening, Evan confronted Lauren again. She was folding laundry in the bedroom when he walked in, his expression hard. Why didn't you tell me you met with Brian yesterday? He asked without preamble. Lauren froze, a pair of socks in her hands. I didn't think it was important. It was just a follow-up meeting. Not important? Evan repeated, his voice rising slightly. You promised me no more secrets, Lauren. How am I supposed to trust you when you keep hiding things? I wasn't hiding it, she insisted, setting the socks down. I was going to tell you, but I didn't want to stress you out after the week you've had. That's not your decision to make, Evan snapped. If we're going to fix this, I need full honesty. No more half-truths. Do you even understand how hard this has been for me? Lauren's face softened with guilt. I do, Evan. I'm sorry. I should have told you. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. The anger simmered down slightly, but the hurt remained. This isn't just about Brian. It's about trust. I've been out here thinking the worst because you won't let me in. I need to know that you're not going behind my back. I'm not, Lauren said softly. I swear. I've already cut ties with him after this last meeting. I'm done with the financial stuff. From now on, you'll know everything. No more secrets. Evan stared at her for a long moment, searching her face for any sign of dishonesty. He wanted to believe her, but trust was a fragile thing, so easily broken and painfully slow to rebuild. Okay, he said finally. But this is your last chance, Lauren. If I catch you lying again, I'm done. I understand, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Thank you for giving me another chance. Evan nodded, though the weight in his chest didn't fully lift. The storm between them had settled again, but he knew it was far from over. The next few days brought a tentative peace. Lauren kept her word, being more open about her schedule and finances. She showed Evan the updated account statements, and even deleted Brian's contact information from her phone in front of him. It was a step in the right direction, but Evan remained cautious. He had seen too many people promise change only to revert to old patterns. At work, his colleagues noticed a change in him. "You've been quieter lately," Mateo said during a shift. "Everything all right?" "Yeah, just going through some stuff at home," Evan replied. "Trying to work things out." Mateo nodded sympathetically. "Relationships are tough, man. But if anyone can handle it, it's you. You've got that never-give-up mentality." Evan chuckled softly. "Yeah, maybe. We'll see." Despite his doubts, there were moments when he felt glimpses of hope. One evening, he and Lauren sat on the porch after putting Max to bed. They talked about their early days together, the road trips, the spontaneous adventures, and for a brief moment, it felt like the walls between them were crumbling. "I miss this," Lauren said quietly, resting her head on his shoulder. "I miss us." "Me too," Evan admitted. "But if we want this to work, we have to be honest. No more pretending everything's fine when it's not." "I know," she whispered. "I'm ready to do the work." "Are you?" Evan didn't answer right away. Instead, he gazed out at the darkening sky, the stars slowly emerging from behind the clouds. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like they might have a chance. "I'm willing to try," he said softly. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was a start. The sense of fragile peace that had settled over Evan's life didn't last long. Despite Lauren's promises of honesty, the doubts lingered like an open wound that refused to heal. Even on good days, when she was affectionate and attentive, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered, "What if she's still hiding something?" He tried to silence it. He told himself that trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight, that he had to give her a chance. But after everything that had happened, it wasn't that simple. The fear of betrayal had rooted itself deep inside him, twisting his thoughts and poisoning every moment of vulnerability. Evan sat in his car outside Max's school one afternoon, waiting for dismissal. The quiet hum of the engine provided a steady rhythm to his thoughts. He had spent the morning organizing patient reports and reviewing trauma protocols, but his mind had been elsewhere the entire time. He scrolled through the photos Derek had sent again, studying the man in them, Brian. Evan's jaw tightened. He hated how familiar this man seemed to Lauren, how effortlessly they had smiled at each other in those pictures. It didn't matter that Lauren had insisted it was business, it still gnawed at him. The school bell rang, pulling him from his thoughts. Children flooded out of the building, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Max spotted him from across the parking lot and ran toward the car, his backpack bouncing on his shoulders. "Hey, Dad!" Max said as he climbed into the passenger seat. "Coach said I scored the most goals in practice today." "That's awesome, buddy," Evan replied, forcing a smile. "I'm proud of you." Max beamed, launching into an enthusiastic retelling of his soccer practice. Evan listened, nodding at the right moments, but part of him was only half present. His thoughts kept drifting back to Lauren. He hated that her secrecy was affecting not only their marriage, but also his ability to focus on his son. "Hey, Dad," Max said after a while, his tone turning curious. "Is everything okay? You seem kinda distracted." Evan hesitated, then reached over to tousle Max's hair. "I'm just tired, that's all. Long day at work." Max nodded, accepting the answer for now. But his perceptiveness made Evan feel a pang of guilt. Max didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of his parents' problems. He deserved stability, not the strained silences and tension that had filled their home. That evening, Evan found himself staring at his phone again, debating whether to call Derek. He had told himself that he was done with the surveillance, that he needed to trust Lauren if they had any chance of moving forward. But the temptation gnawed at him. He needed reassurance, evidence that there was truly nothing left to uncover. Before he could make a decision, Lauren walked into the room, holding 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to him and sat beside him on the couch. "Thought you could use this," she said softly. "Thanks," Evan muttered, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. They sat in silence for a while, the tension between them less sharp than before but still present. "I know things haven't been easy lately," Lauren said after a moment. "But I want you to know that I'm trying. I meant what I said about being honest." "I know," Evan replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's just hard to shake the feeling that something's still off." Lauren sighed, placing her mug on the coffee table. "I get it. I really do. I hurt you, and it's going to take time to rebuild that trust. But I need you to meet me halfway. If we keep living in suspicion, we'll never move forward." Evan stared into his tea, the steam curling upward in delicate tendrils. He knew she was right. But knowing and feeling were 2 different things. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll try." Lauren gave him a small smile. "That's all I can ask for." They spent the rest of the evening watching a movie, the atmosphere between them lighter than it had been in weeks. For a brief moment, Evan allowed himself to hope that maybe things could get better. Maybe they could find their way back to each other. But the next day, everything unraveled again. Evan was at the station, finishing paperwork, when he received a text from Derek. "We need to talk. Call me ASAP." His stomach dropped. He stepped outside and dialed Derek's number. "Hey," Derek said, his tone grim. "Sorry to bother you again, but something came up. Brian made another move." "What do you mean?" Evan asked, his pulse quickening. "He withdrew a large sum of cash from one of his offshore accounts," Derek explained. "And there's a record of a payment sent to someone matching Lauren's profile. It could be nothing, or it could mean he's trying to cover something up." Evan's blood ran cold. "You think he's paying her off?" "I don't know," Derek said. "But it's suspicious, especially with everything else that's happened." Evan clenched his jaw, a storm of emotions surging inside him. He had tried to trust Lauren. He had tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. But now it felt like the ground was crumbling beneath him all over again. "I need to confront her," Evan said, his voice tight. "This ends tonight." "Just be careful," Derek warned. "Don't let your anger take over. Get the facts first." Evan nodded, though he wasn't sure how much control he had left. He was done waiting, done second-guessing. It was time for the truth, no matter how painful it might be. When Evan arrived home that evening, he found Lauren in the living room, flipping through a magazine. She looked up and smiled, but the smile faded when she saw the intensity in his eyes. "Evan?" she asked cautiously. "What's wrong?" "We need to talk," he said, his voice cold and steady. "Now." Lauren's expression shifted to one of concern. "What's going on?" "You tell me," Evan replied. "Because I just found out about another payment tied to Brian. And I want the truth, no more lies." Lauren's face went pale. The confrontation he had tried to avoid was finally here, and there was no turning back. Lauren stared at Evan, her eyes wide with shock. The air between them felt suffocating, thick with unspoken accusations and raw tension. She opened her mouth to speak but hesitated, as if choosing her next words carefully. Evan had seen this look before, on patients who knew bad news was coming but weren't ready to face it. "Evan, I can explain," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Go ahead," Evan replied, crossing his arms. "I'm listening." She swallowed hard, glancing away for a moment. "The payment wasn't what you think. Brian, he was supposed to help us with a financial issue, but things got complicated." "Complicated how?" Evan demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. "You've been withdrawing thousands of dollars, hiding meetings, and now there's a mysterious payment tied to him. What part of that isn't shady?" Lauren took a deep breath and met his gaze. "A few months ago, I found out that one of our investments was at risk, an account I hadn't told you about. I thought I could fix it on my own by working with Brian, but he pushed me into some risky deals. When I realized things were going south, I panicked. I didn't want to lose everything, so I took out more money to cover the losses. Evan's mind reeled. Investments? Risky deals? This wasn't the story he had expected, but it still felt like another betrayal. Why the hell didn't you just tell me? He asked. We could have handled it together. I was ashamed, Lauren said quietly. I knew how hard you were working, how much you sacrificed for us. I didn't want you to think I'd failed. Evan shook his head, the anger bubbling beneath his skin. You don't get to decide that for me. You don't get to hide things and pretend everything's fine while I'm sitting here thinking the worst. I know, Lauren whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. I made a mistake, several mistakes. But I swear, Evan, there's nothing romantic going on between me and Brian. It was all business. I was just trying to fix things. Evan stared at her, his emotions a tangled mess of anger, hurt, and disbelief. He wanted to believe her, but the lies had built up like walls between them. Even if this was the truth, it didn't erase the damage that had been done. You're telling me you didn't take anything from him personally? No secret deals? Evan asked, his voice low and steady. Nothing, Lauren said firmly. I cut ties with him completely. I even reported him to his firm's compliance department for unethical behavior. That payment you found was part of a refund, money he owed us. Evan exhaled slowly, some of the tension in his chest easing. He didn't fully trust her yet, but her explanation felt plausible. Derek's report had mentioned Brian's questionable practices. Maybe Lauren had been caught in the middle of something bigger than either of them had realized. I need proof, Evan said after a long pause. If you want me to believe you, I need to see everything, documents, emails, whatever you have. Lauren nodded. Okay. I'll show you everything. They spent the next 2 hours going through Lauren's records. She logged into her accounts, showing Evan the investment history and correspondence with Brian. The transactions matched her story, losses from bad investments, withdrawals to cover those losses, and finally, the refunded payment from Brian's firm. Evan leaned back in his chair, exhaustion washing over him. It wasn't the clean resolution he had hoped for, but it was enough to give him some clarity. Lauren had made mistakes, big ones, but it seemed she was telling the truth now. I wish you'd come to me sooner, he said quietly. We could have avoided so much of this. I know, Lauren whispered. I was scared, Evan. But I'm not going to hide anything from you anymore. You have my word. Evan rubbed his face, the weight of the past few months bearing down on him. He wasn't ready to forgive her completely, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they could rebuild what had been broken. We need to rebuild trust, he said, his voice firm but calm. And that means no more secrets. If something comes up, anything, you tell me. We deal with it together. Agreed, Lauren said softly. No more secrets. They sat in silence for a moment, the tension in the room slowly dissipating. Evan knew that healing would take time, but this was a step in the right direction. For now, it was enough. The following day, Evan met with Derek at a cafe to update him on the situation. Derek listened carefully, nodding as Evan explained what Lauren had revealed. Sounds like she's telling the truth, Derek said. Brian's reputation checks out. He's pulled this kind of crap on other clients before. Yeah, Evan said, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. Still hard to wrap my head around it. I thought it was an affair at first. You had reason to, Derek said. Trust is hard to rebuild after something like this. But if she's making an effort, that's a good sign. Evan nodded slowly. Thanks for everything, Derek. I don't think I could have gotten through this without your help. Anytime, man, Derek replied. Just take care of yourself. And your family? Evan left the cafe feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The storm in his mind had calmed, though the scars of mistrust remained. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, he believed they had a chance. That night, Evan and Lauren tucked Max into bed together. As they stood in the doorway watching him sleep, Lauren reached for Evan's hand. He didn't pull away. "We'll get through this," she whispered. "One step at a time. One step at a time," Evan echoed softly. They walked downstairs together, the shadows of doubt finally beginning to lift. The days that followed were marked by slow, deliberate progress. Evan and Lauren were learning to navigate their fractured relationship with a cautious but determined effort. Transparency became their new rule. Every conversation, every financial decision, was now laid bare between them. It wasn't easy, old habits of guardedness and suspicion lingered, but they were trying. For Evan, the change was both a relief and a challenge. He no longer felt the same overwhelming need to investigate Lauren's every move, but the scars of mistrust hadn't fully healed. There were moments when his mind would drift back to the photos Derek had sent, or the times he had seen Lauren take those secret phone calls. The memories still stung, but they no longer controlled him. Lauren, on her part, had taken active steps to prove her commitment. She scheduled a session with a financial advisor from a more reputable firm, this time with Evan fully involved. They sat together in the advisor's office, going over plans to recover from the losses caused by Brian's shady dealings. "We'll take it slow," the advisor, a middle-aged woman named Diane, explained. "No high-risk investments. Our goal is to rebuild stability first." "That sounds good," Lauren said, glancing at Evan. "Right. Yeah," Evan agreed. "Stability is exactly what we need." As they left the office, Evan felt a sense of cautious optimism. They were finally addressing their problems head-on, rather than letting them fester in silence. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One evening, after Max had gone to bed, Evan and Lauren found themselves sitting together on the back porch. The cool spring air carried the scent of blooming flowers, and the stars shone brightly overhead. It was a rare moment of peace, something they hadn't experienced in months. "Remember when we used to come out here just to watch the stars?" Lauren asked softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Yeah," Evan said with a faint smile. "We'd stay out here for hours, talking about everything and nothing." "We should do that more often," Lauren said. "I miss it." Evan nodded, his gaze fixed on the sky. "Me too." They sat quietly for a while, the tension between them slowly easing. For the first time in a long while, Evan didn't feel like he was walking on eggshells. He didn't feel the need to interrogate Lauren or second-guess her intentions. The doubts were still there, but they no longer dominated his thoughts. "I've been thinking about counseling," Lauren said suddenly. "For both of us. Maybe it would help us work through everything." Evan considered her suggestion. He had always been skeptical of counseling, viewing it as a last resort for couples on the brink of collapse. But after everything they had been through, maybe it was exactly what they needed. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "It's worth a try." Lauren smiled, her eyes shimmering with relief. "I'll set it up. We'll do this together." Together. The word carried more weight than Evan had expected. For so long, he had felt isolated in his fears and suspicions. But now, for the first time in months, he felt like they were truly on the same page. The following week, they attended their first counseling session. The therapist, Dr. Harris, was a calm, empathetic woman who immediately put them at ease. "Trust is one of the hardest things to rebuild after a breach," Dr. Harris said early in the session. "But it's not impossible. It starts with open communication and small, consistent acts of trustworthiness." Lauren nodded, her expression earnest. "I've been trying to be more open with Evan. I know I messed up by keeping things from him. And I'm trying to let go of the paranoia," Evan added. "But it's hard. Every time I think we're making progress, those doubts creep back in." "That's normal," Dr. Harris said gently. "Healing takes time. You both have to be patient, with yourselves and with each other. It's not about erasing the past but learning how to move forward despite it." The session was emotionally draining but productive. They talked about their fears, their regrets, and their hopes for the future. By the end of it, Evan felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced in months. It wasn't a magical solution, but it was a step in the right direction. Over the next few weeks, Evan noticed more positive changes. Lauren became more engaged in their daily lives, making an effort to reconnect with him and Max. She attended Max's soccer games, cheering louder than anyone on the sidelines. She also took the initiative to plan small family outings, trips to the park, movie nights at home, and even a weekend hike through a nearby nature trail. Evan, for his part, began to lower his defenses. He stopped checking Lauren's phone or obsessively monitoring their bank account. He focused instead on rebuilding their relationship through shared experiences and honest communication. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Max grinned and announced, "This is the best week ever! You guys haven't been fighting at all." Evan and Lauren exchanged a glance, both smiling softly. "We've been working on that," Evan said, ruffling Max's hair. "It's important to us." "Well, it's working," Max declared. "Can we keep it like this forever?" "We'll do our best," Lauren promised, her voice warm and reassuring. Evan felt a surge of gratitude. It wasn't just about him and Lauren anymore, it was about their family. They owed it to Max to create a stable, loving home. And for the first time in a long while, that goal felt within reach. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Lauren rested her head on Evan's shoulder. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. "Thank you for not giving up on us," she whispered. Evan kissed the top of her head, his heart full but still cautious. "Thank you for fighting for us." They fell asleep holding each other, the weight of their troubles finally starting to lift. Months had passed since the first cracks in their marriage had been exposed. The road back to trust and stability had been long and painful, but Evan and Lauren were finally beginning to feel like themselves again. It wasn't perfect, there were still moments of doubt, still scars that hadn't completely healed, but the worst of the storm seemed to be behind them. Counseling became a cornerstone of their progress. Dr. Harris guided them through difficult conversations they might never have been able to have on their own. They learned how to communicate without falling into old patterns of blame and defensiveness. More importantly, they learned how to rebuild intimacy, not just physical, but emotional intimacy, the kind that had been eroded by secrecy and suspicion. During one session, Dr. Harris asked them to reflect on what they had learned from the experience. "I think I've learned that you can't fix everything on your own," Lauren said quietly. "I used to believe that if I just kept my problems to myself, I could protect the people I loved. But all I did was push Evan away. And I've learned that trust isn't about control," Evan added. "When things started going wrong, I tried to control the situation by watching Lauren's every move. But that just made things worse. Real trust has to be built on honesty, not surveillance." Dr. Harris smiled. "That's a powerful realization. Trust is a delicate balance. You're both learning how to hold each other accountable without tearing each other down. That's the foundation of a strong relationship." Evan and Lauren exchanged a glance. It had taken a lot of pain to reach this point, but they were stronger for it. Outside of counseling, their family life continued to improve. Evan found himself reconnecting not only with Lauren but also with Max. They spent more time together as a family, weekend soccer games, camping trips, and lazy Sunday mornings spent making pancakes in the kitchen. The laughter that had once felt distant now echoed through their home again. One evening, Evan and Lauren attended a fundraiser for the local trauma center where Evan worked. It was a formal event, with doctors, nurses, and other emergency responders mingling over cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. Evan had been hesitant to bring Lauren, worried about how people might perceive them after everything that had happened. But she had insisted. "We're in this together," she had said. "I want to support you." As they entered the grand ballroom, Evan felt a surge of pride. Lauren looked stunning in a deep blue dress, her smile radiant and confident. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the weight of their past hanging over them like a shadow. They were moving forward, together. Throughout the night, colleagues approached them with warm greetings and congratulations. Word had spread about the pile-up on the highway months earlier, and many of them praised Evan for his heroic actions that night. "You're a real lifesaver, Evan," one of the trauma surgeons said, clinking glasses with him. "Not just on the job, but at home too. It's not easy to rebuild after something like that." Evan glanced at Lauren, who squeezed his hand gently. "Yeah," he said with a small smile. "But some things are worth fighting for." Later that night, as they drove home, Evan reflected on how far they had come. The anger and fear that had once consumed him were no longer in control. He had learned to trust again, not blindly, but with an open heart. And Lauren had earned that trust through her actions, not just her words. When they arrived home, Max was waiting for them, bouncing excitedly in his pajamas. "You guys are back. Did you bring me anything?" he asked with a grin. Lauren laughed and handed him a small bag of chocolates from the fundraiser. "Of course. We wouldn't forget about you." Max hugged both of them before running off to the kitchen to devour his treat. Evan watched him go, his heart swelling with gratitude. This was what he had fought for, his family, their future. And now, it felt like they were finally on solid ground. In the weeks that followed, Evan and Lauren continued to build on their progress. They set new goals for their relationship, focusing on open communication and shared responsibilities. They also made time for themselves as a couple, rediscovering the joy that had once brought them together. One night, after Max had fallen asleep, they found themselves sitting on the back porch again. The stars stretched endlessly above them, a reminder of both the vastness of the world and the small, precious moments that made life meaningful. "I was thinking," Lauren said softly, resting her head on Evan's shoulder. "Maybe we should take a vacation. Just the three of us. Somewhere quiet, where we can really unwind." "That sounds perfect," Evan replied. "We've earned it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the cool breeze carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. Evan thought back to the pileup on the highway, to Rachel and Lily, whose lives had been saved that night. He wondered how they were doing, if they had found peace after their ordeal. In a way, their story had become intertwined with his own, a reminder that survival was only the first step. Healing was the journey that followed. "Do you think we'll ever forget this?" Lauren asked quietly. "No," Evan said honestly. "But maybe that's a good thing. It's a reminder of how far we've come, and how much we can overcome." Lauren smiled and kissed him gently. "I like that." They held each other under the stars, their hearts finally at ease. The past would always be a part of their story, but it no longer defined them. They had chosen to move forward, and for the first time in a long while, the future felt bright.